You're listening to the Building Psychological Strength podcast, Professional Edition. My name is April Seifert. Not only am I a doctoral level psychologist, but I've been a successful entrepreneur for a number of years, and I've learned firsthand that building psychological strength can have a direct impact on your professional success. In this Friday edition of the podcast, I'll offer you tools, tips, tricks, and information to help you become stronger, more resilient, and more successful. Let's get to it. I love this quote. Feedback, when given well, should not alienate the receiver of the feedback, but should motivate them to perform better. Welcome back, friends, and happy Friday. I love recording these episodes because I know it means we are going to be celebrating the weekend. So that's always awesome. And I want to send you into the weekend this week by talking about a topic that can be sort of difficult for a lot of us. But yet it's a topic that is incredibly important for us to address, just given the impact that it has on our own success, but more importantly, on the success of teams that we might be leading. So today we are going to be talking about the topic of giving negative feedback or constructive feedback. But before we dive in, I just want to give an example of a situation. You know, you imagine you're in your job and you're leading a team and it's coming up on maybe it's end of the year reviews, or maybe just a member of your team just didn't perform up to par in a meeting or with a project. It leaves you in this difficult situation of, as a leader, needing to address the situation and help coach that team member to do better. But the thing is, even with those amazing intentions in mind, right? Like, you have great intentions. You want that person to succeed. You want the team to elevate. You want things to go well. Oh, it just doesn't feel good. The emotions around having to give somebody negative feedback, having to ask them to change or point out performance that just isn't working for, whatever situation they're in, it's not easy for most people. And so today I want to talk about, this is a very deep topic. We could talk about this for hours, but I want to highlight one psychological principle in particular to keep in mind when you have to give negative feedback. And that principle is emotional intelligence. Now, when we think about emotional intelligence, there's actually a bunch of components to it, but 5 in particular, but I'm going to highlight 2 today because these 2, when you really dig into them, are 2 of the factors that really come into play when we're in these difficult situations where we're having to deliver a message that might not be well received or might come out of the blue for that team member who's on the receiving end. So I want to go through these 2 factors really quickly and talk about a couple of ways that you can strengthen yourself in these factors. So factor number 1, and again, this is one of the 5 factors that bubble up into what we would call emotional intelligence, or EQ. The first factor that I want to highlight is self-awareness. So self-awareness is our ability to have knowledge of our own emotions, our own feelings, to be mindful of our own behaviors, our strengths and our weaknesses, and then understand how those are going to affect people around us. Now think about that, right? The reason why giving negative feedback is difficult for us typically is because it creates an emotional reaction in us. If we were perfectly comfortable or perfectly unemotional about it, it's unlikely that we would feel as, I don't know of a better word to say, but icky about giving negative feedback. It creates an emotional state in us that feels uncertain. It feels maybe guilty. We feel just this slew of negative mixed up emotions. And being aware of that fact is really important, particularly when we want to make sure that we are behaving and acting in a way that moves us in the direction of our goal, which means our goal is to deliver clear feedback that helps that person improve. So I want you to imagine that you're in that situation, right? Imagine you're in the situation of having to give somebody negative feedback and you start speaking and you notice that that other person is also emotionally reacting. Maybe they're getting sad, or maybe they're starting to get critical of themselves. Because you are likely a decent human being who can, to some degree, read that emotion in somebody else, you may get this knee-jerk reaction to soften the feedback, to muddle it a little bit, to be less transparent or direct. But think about it. Is that actually what's going to give that person the feedback they need to hear in order to improve? Or is it a better situation for you to give clear feedback, not to be mean, not to be rude, but to give clear feedback so that that person knows what happened and knows what to do next time? Probably the latter. But without self-awareness, we don't recognize our own emotional reaction and the impact that it can have on our ability to effectively deliver that message. So in particular, in terms of building this skill, I want you to think about a few things. I want you to start paying attention to your reactions in some of these situations that have a bit of friction to them. You don't have to do anything in a professional setting necessarily. Just pay attention to how you feel. If somebody cuts in front of you in line, or if you think somebody might have forgotten something and you need to remind them, or any of these situations where there's just maybe a small amount of friction. Pay attention to 4 things. Number 1, pay attention to your thoughts. Thoughts are obviously what goes on in our mind. Thoughts are sentences. Thoughts are images. Thoughts are sort of videos that play out in our mind. Number 2, pay attention to your emotions or your feelings. Now, I gave that definition of thoughts because while thoughts are sentences, typically emotions are one word. So while a thought might be, wow, I feel like I need to soften this a little bit because she's really taking this badly, an emotion might be anxiety. One word. So thoughts, number 1, feelings or emotions, number 2, number 3, bodily sensations. How does your body feel? Where is that anxiety located and how do you know it's there? Maybe your skin is flushing. Maybe you're feeling tightness or you're breathing differently. Maybe you are starting to feel a little bit mentally foggy. Pay attention to those bodily sensations and then pay attention to the action urges or the behavioral urges that you're having. I'm having the urge to soften this message or walk it back a little bit. So the more you can pay attention to your own reactions, starting in outside situations where the stakes maybe aren't as high, the more you can build your own self-awareness, which is such an important component of emotional intelligence. The second one that I want to highlight is empathy. This one's maybe obvious, but it's worth talking about. Empathy in this situation means walking in that person's shoes, understanding the situation that they're in, and keeping in mind that person's individuality and that person's circumstances. We rarely behave in a vacuum. We all bring our own past, our own experiences, our own sensitivities, our own strengths, our own weaknesses to a situation, and that team member is no different. So being empathetic, understanding the entire situation and listening, actively listening to understand and to uncover root cause can be a really important component in building empathy. The second thing in order to build this skill is to keep in mind individual differences. Something as simple as, is this person introverted or extroverted? Is this person, I love this example, is this person an ask communicator or are they a tell communicator? Meaning, are they the type of person who needs to be asked a question in order to volunteer information? Or are they the type of person who just will tell you what's on their mind? I'll just side note, I'm a tell communicator and my husband is an ask communicator. You have no idea just how much of a breakthrough it was in our relationship when we realized that difference between us. So in a professional setting, same deal. What type of a communicator is that person that helps you direct that conversation in a much more empathetic way? Because no two people are alike. And if you can tailor that feedback experience to that person, it's going to make it so much more effective. As a leader, just to kind of sum things up, your goal is likely, because you're a great person, I'm sure, your goal is to get the best out of your team. Your goal is to help people develop in their own skills. And sometimes, unfortunately, that means having to deliver some tough feedback. And if you do that intelligently, emotionally intelligently, you're much more likely to have the impact that you want. One other quick thing that I want to mention, if you're listening to this and you're like, yes, I'm down with this emotional intelligence thing, I want to offer you a quick resource. My very good friend, Rich Brocken, is a keynote speaker, and he is an absolute expert in the area of emotional intelligence. His website is richbrocken.com. I'll link it down below in this episode description so that you've got it. If you ever are in need of someone who can come in and educate a team or just provide content or information on emotional intelligence, whether it's to do with situations where negative feedback might come into place, or the myriad of other situations where it comes into play in a professional setting, I couldn't recommend somebody more highly. So Rich Brocken, great resource. Wanted to make sure that I mentioned him and shout him out on this episode because this is so squarely in his wheelhouse, and I had to share that resource with you. All right, before I go, I recently introduced you to the Blinkist app, which takes some of the best, most influential, most valuable nonfiction books and gists them down into 15 to 20-minute summaries. So in these short summaries, you can listen to a series of blinks and understand the key concepts, insights, and take-home points from some of the most transformative books, and you can get started for free. So if you liked this episode, might I suggest listening to the 10-minute blink, 10 minutes, that's it, of the book Emotional Intelligence 2.0. It's on the Blinkist app. I want to thank Blinkist for sponsoring the show, and because you're a listener, you can try Blinkist for yourself for free for 7 days using the link in this episode description. And because you're a listener of this podcast, you can get 20% off an entire year of Blinkist by clicking on the link below. Thank you so much for joining me for this professional edition of the Building Psych Strength podcast. If you're an entrepreneur or a business professional and you're interested in becoming more successful, hit the subscribe button. And do share this with others who might benefit from this content. Until next week, be strong, friends, be resilient, and be successful.